like it backdates it too. All right, here we go. Click. And we're live. It is Sunday, February 7th, 2021. It is Super Bowl Sunday. And that means that the group of people that are actually here for In Lieu of Fun is the molten core of the audience. The people who are here instead of fevered preparations for the Super Bowl. I can't even tell you who's in the Super Bowl, except that it has something to do with Tom Brady, because I figured out today that I have not watched the Super Bowl since the first term of the Clinton administration. And I'm not proud of that. It's just a fact. I told Kate yesterday that I was going to take care of the mystery guest, and the monologue today is going to be about the travails I went through to honor that promise and come up with a mystery guest. Because I went to our usual crew, the John Roush's and the Paul Rosenzweigs and the Corey Shockeys, because, you know, George Shultz died, and I thought it'd be a neat day to have Corey Shockey come on and talk about George Shultz and his legacy, which is quite an interesting subject. And they couldn't do it. And I asked Mike Chase, a.k.a. Crime a Day, and he couldn't do it. And Mike Pesca couldn't do it. And the list of people who couldn't do it, and David Chris couldn't do it.
Days. I have literally had those days. Like, everyone that we're just like, we take for granted is like, oh, and we want somebody to come on and shoot the shit for an hour.
And it is like just one of those days. I think it's because it's Super Bowl Sunday and everybody's got like Super Bowl stuff going on, except me and Kate and, the other 137 of you who are actually watching this live, and plus, 65 people on YouTube, which is much smaller than it usually is. So I think a lot of people are doing Super Bowl prep. And finally, at 4:30, not half an hour ago, I turned to Tamara Cofman Wittes and said, I do not have a mystery guest. And Tamara Wittes, who has long taken the view that In Lieu of Fun is something that she does not entirely approve of, who is the last of the four members of the Rational Security team to appear on In Lieu of Fun.
And the Wittes family.
And yeah, she is like even not the first Wittes to appear. Looked at me and said, if you need me to cover for you, I'll be the mystery guest. So here she is, Tamara Cofman Wittes. She attached one condition to her presence on In Lieu of Fun, which is that she gets to talk about low-flying helicopter, her supervillain nemesis. So let's start with a softball question. Tamara, welcome to In Lieu of Fun. What do you think of helicopters that fly really low in the District of Columbia?
This is amazing.
Okay, so I don't quite know. First of all, hi, everyone. Really great to be here. I don't know the protocol. How long do you want this answer to be? Because as you know, Ben, I could go on about low-flying helicopters for a long time.
All right, how about this? I will ask you a series of yes or no questions about low-flying helicopter.
No.
So wait, I want to know, is this like a privacy thing, or is it purely the noise? Is it the fact that it's like, are you as upset about news helicopters as you are about state helicopters? How do you feel about drones and large birds? I just want to know everything.
But wait,
these are good questions.
We have
these
to go
are very
get
important questions.
We have to get to the core question here, though, which is how did all the helicopters in the world that fly low become personified as a single villain hashtag low flying helicopter that has like a juridical persona in your mind?
Okay, so I'm looking at the comments, and I can see that there are other people who feel my pain here. I'm not alone in this. This is quite evident. Northern Virginia, Montgomery County, especially people who live on the eastern side of the District of Columbia, also deal with the low-flying helicopter problem. And if you live anywhere in central to northwest, or actually any quadrant of Washington except northeast, you're basically dealing with the low-flying helicopters. Who are they? Well, over the years, you see, as I have pursued my campaign against low-flying helicopter, I have learned a great deal. There are Coast Guard helicopters patrolling the Potomac River because of the idiots who think that they should swim at Great Falls and drown. There are the local news traffic helicopters that you expect who circle around. There are the DC police helicopters that are occasionally, spotlighting while they're chasing somebody or monitoring a protest or whatever. Very, very rarely, like only once, thanks to the Trump administration, have we had a DC National Guard helicopter whipping up the dust in downtown Washington to disperse protesters. That happened last summer in the Black Lives Matter protests after the murder of George Floyd. And we have, of course, the VIP helicopters that ferry the president and vice president and secretary of defense. So we are overloaded with helicopters here in the Washington area. And of course, we have National Airport right across the river, right outside DC. So the helicopters, for the last few years, have had their ceiling lowered. They have to fly low. The result being that our house shakes. Many other houses shake. Children are awoken from naps. Puppies are startled and upset. And I personally am driven insane.
The cats howl.
Yeah, the cats howl. And I'm sure, Kate, it's not good for the birds either.
No. So you know what this sounds like? It sounds like I'm sorry to go straight to property law, but this is a nuisance. Do you know there's an entire doctrine of this? And so it's called the ad coelum doctrine, and it's the idea that you own everything above your land all the way to the heavens and everything below it all the way down to the bowels of the earth. And this is like not literally, a few pieces of case law say not literally, but if you're making any use of your airspace, query what use counts as, like whether you just want like light or whatever. This is a trespass, and so like maybe you should sue.
Okay, so I am so glad that you are here with your lawyerly expertise to tell me how are my air rights affected by living in a federal district.
Yeah. I mean, I bet they would say that it's all that you don't have any.
Yeah.
But I still want to know how.
Basically, I have no air rights. And that is my problem. The lack of air rights. This is why DC needs statehood, so that I can sue the low-flying helicopter.
But again, how did the low-flying helicopter become... It's many different low-flying helicopters. It's not a single defendant. Like, how did this all become one creature in your mind?
And behind me. No.
Do you?
No, but I have this duck.
Low-flying duck.
How does the duck feel about helicopters? Because I have to tell you that my obsession with low-flying helicopters has become sufficiently well known that a colleague actually sent me a helicopter Christmas ornament, which was, this is the best part, it was the White House Christmas ornament last year, was a Sikorsky helicopter. Thank you, Donald Trump.
Is that a
joke? Yeah, no, really? It's serious. It is seriously the White House Christmas ornament.
That is like horrendous on so many levels. Like, it's tacky. It's like, well, anyways.
Some years we had Bo the fluffy dog, and this last year we had the Sikorsky helicopter. Yes.
All right. What will constitute victory over a low-flying helicopter? If we get, like, and for those of you who don't live in the Washington area, when the helicopters fly over Washington, it is actually bone-crushing. Thank
you for validating me.
Like, think about the beginning, the opening sequence of Apocalypse Now, where there's that chung, chung, chung. Only it's like so loud that the whole house shakes. So it's impressive. But what constitutes victory? If that happens only once a week? If that happens, like, is it the frequency of low-flying helicopter incidents? Is it the lowness of the sense that it's about to crash into the house? Well, like, what if it flies 100 feet higher? What have you thought about, like, what victory looks like in this war?
You know,
get a paintball gun, Tammy.
Okay, so a paintball gun, I think, would be legal in the district. I have actually there was an incident last year in which a BB was fired at a helicopter from Virginia. I hasten to add, but this is just to demonstrate that it's a problem that has intensely frustrated residents of the Washington metro area. And so, what does victory look like, Ben? So, as you know, because you are informed. This isn't my personal obsession alone. This is such a problem now that it was literally language inserted into the NDAA last year, the National Defense Authorization Act, compelling a study to be done of helicopter noise in the DC area. That study was completed and now has resulted in a set of recommendations issued to the FAA. And so in future years, my hope is that, number one, they will have some daily maximum, because right now it's like several times a day that, the windows are shaking. Number two, that they will restrict certain helicopters to defined flight paths over the river where they're not shaking people's houses. And number three, that they will raise the ceiling back up, because frankly, it didn't used to be this bad. It really didn't. And it was about 4 or 5 years ago that they made the helicopters fly lower. I
found something that you might think you might find really useful. Apparently, the FAA has a hotline that you can call for noise complaints of low-flying helicopters.
Yes, and there is a new hotline just for the DMV. For our area, for the helicopter.
Really?
Because Tammy was calling so often that they had to create a special line just for her.
She's like, they're like my best friends. They know me there.
I promise it wasn't me. It was Congressman Beyer and Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. It really is like just good, responsive democratic governance.
This is amazing. And so, has anyone ever responded to your noise complaints that you've made? Has there ever been anything?
No, but I have to tell you, when I first started looking at this, which was like 15 years ago, I swear, there was a guy in the area who was so obsessed that he had built a website that tracked every helicopter flight he observed over the city. And it was like, this was the early 2000s. So it's not like a super high tech website, but it was, as the internet was in those days, the product of one man's obsession. And I actually would go to that website frequently.
It wasn't just one man's obsession, actually.
Wait, which man is this? I'm looking at all the do you know that there are regional aviation noise ombudsmen?
I did not know that.
Oh my God!
Kate, my goodness. Okay, we've sent Kate down a wormhole.
They have phone numbers, and they have email addresses, and they have real names, like real people. And this looks like people who were like appointed.
Kate, you are exposing these people to.
I'm not gonna. Let's not dox the ombudsman. Let's not.
Who the hell decides it's a good idea to be the aviation noise ombudsman? Like, who decides that that's going to be a job they accept?
Is that a political appointment?
I don't know.
I want to be the ambassador to Luxembourg. I want to be the New Jersey FAA ombudsman.
Alaska has its own, all by itself.
Well, that makes sense.
Yes.
Well, they have low-flying fixed-wing aircraft.
Yeah.
Oh, God. This is so nuts.
All right.
Okay, sorry.
So, for those of you who don't know Tamara, she actually doesn't usually sound like a person who is obsessed with helicopters. She normally sounds like a person who talks about and thinks about foreign policy particularly but not exclusively in the Middle East. And so why don't we start with, after only 15 minutes of ranting about low-flying helicopter, we can move on to...
That was a hell of a yes-no question session.
Yeah, well, no, she nixed the yes-no session question. We should start with the same question we asked Tom Wright about the other day, which is, how much is going to be different in a Biden administration as a matter of foreign policy, and how quickly will we see the change?
You're asking in the Middle East how different?
No,
or
well, just with Tom, we actually did a kind of round the world tour. But I guess, like, what are the big changes you're expecting to see anywhere, and how quickly?
Yeah, so I don't want to be repetitive of Tom because I probably...
You don't have an Irish accent.
I don't have an Irish accent, and I probably agree with most of what he said, and because he says it with an Irish accent, I know I can't top that. So I'll just say, let me focus on a few things that are less about the substance of policy and more about the process and the tone, and that are already evident. Number one, the government is giving daily press briefings about its conduct of foreign affairs. And when the Secretary of State or the National Security Advisor has a phone call with a foreign counterpart, we get a readout issued by our government immediately to the world to tell us what happened on that phone call. A substantive readout. Number two, we have just in the last few days, actually, I think it was on Thursday and Friday, the administration issued some presidential directives on the organization of the national security process, including who's on the National Security Council and who's on the Principals Committee and the Deputies Committee, which is something every new administration does. But they also kind of spelled out in greater detail the way the interagency process is going to be run and who's going to control which part of it. And they emphasized, this theme that's been running through the administration from the time they started announcing appointments, which is that domestic policy and foreign policy can't really be disentangled. And you need a foreign policy that works for the American people and works for the American middle class. And so in this presidential directive, they laid out that domestic agencies can come to National Security Council meetings when relevant issues are being discussed. So if we're talking about trade policy, you might have the Labor Department sitting at the interagency policy table. And that, I think, is really important, and that they're doing that right at the beginning, and they're making it really explicit. So, that's a wonky process point, but I actually think it's really important. And, awesome. It is. It's huge.
Yeah.
And not just as a contrast to the Trump administration, but as a contrast to the way foreign policy and national security have been dealt with traditionally as this walled off preserve. And that's not going to be the case now.
Kate?
Yeah, I'm actually kind of wondering specifically about your thoughts in the Middle East. That was I was kind of very interested to hear, a lot of people have said that some of the inroads that Trump were able to make were actually one of the few high points of his administration. I just was kind of curious what your thoughts were on, the likelihood of those continuing, and or anything else that can kind of be done further.
So I think that there is one concrete diplomatic achievement for the Trump administration in the Middle East. And I'm not sure that most of it can be ascribed to the work of the Trump administration. And I'm talking about the diplomatic opening between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain, and then Morocco and maybe Sudan. This was a relationship between Israel and the Gulf states and Israel and Morocco that have been going on under the table for years. And what got them to sort of decide to take it out into the open was, number one, the sense of a shared threat from Iran, And believe me, if these guys had had total confidence in the way the United States was dealing with the threat from Iran, they might not have felt compelled to create an open coalition in the way that they did. So that in and of itself is indicative. But the other thing was the Israeli plan. It was a political plan of the Israeli government that was elected last year to annex territory in the West Bank. And so the Emiratis basically traded full diplomatic recognition for an Israeli willingness to postpone indefinitely that annexation. I'm not sure the Trump administration had a lot to do with that. Once the parties brought it to them, I give them credit for jumping on it and realizing it and bringing it home. But I'm not sure, but I think that if you look at it in the scheme of American foreign policy in the Middle East, where we have ISIS, we have the challenge from Iran, not only for global security and nuclear proliferation, but for our regional partners, the Arab-Israeli peace process, which is, completely foundered. I don't see a lot of accomplishments on the big stuff. So I think this small thing, which is it is a big deal, will continue. I think the Biden administration said they want to build on it. But fundamentally, it happened because the parties saw a mutual interest, and they're going to continue to pursue that no matter what we do.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Joining us from Madison, Wisconsin, a particularly bedraggled-looking Jordan Ellenberg.
Jordan Ellenberg.
Look how freezing it is. We are at actually it's just dipped above 0 Fahrenheit right now. We've been a little below 0 for most of the day. I think we're up to about 6 or 7, which is going to be our.
Oh my gosh, it's so cold in the Midwest right now.
This is why I left the Midwest. Thank you, Jordan, for the reminder.
It looks like the ice has gotten your beard too.
I go out and dip, to sort of freshen up right before I go on screen.
Wow,
Western TV trick.
It's a great look, man. Keep it up.
In lieu of makeup.
Jordan has a particularly important question, not on U.S. foreign policy or on helicopters.
Excellent.
I do, and it came up because of your appearance, Tammy. And the question is, what is the correct plural of Wittes?
Oh. Well, this is a little bit context dependent.
Really?
You might think that it would be Wittesi. But that would be a mistake. It would be Wittesi. It could be Wittises. I mean, that's acceptable, I suppose, in common usage.
What about Wittises, like vertices? That was one I was thinking of.
Well, I can understand why you would go there. That's completely logical, Jordan. But the favored plural form is Wittisim, which is the Hebrew plural ending, for those of you who are non-Hebrew speakers.
Also, the Russian plural, Wittisi, is always considered acceptable. But it's an important question. Most people get it wrong. It's always good to ask, particularly if you're the author of a book entitled "How Not to Be Wrong." One way to not be wrong is to ask.
And so, kudos to you, Jordan, for modeling that.
I could have written a much shorter book if it were always that easy.
Yeah. Although I have to say, Wittises does have, it's got some oomph to it. I like it. So thank you for the suggestion.
All right.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to verge off into the inane when you have multiple witnesses.
This is pretty great.
This is the off the rails version of In Lieu of Fun.
Oh, yeah, In Lieu of Fun is usually at least mildly off the rails.
I was just going to say, it is.
We haven't had any puppets on the show yet.
There's one right behind you, actually, Ben.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, and one behind. Yeah.
Hello, who is that?
This is the Lisa Page puppet.
Oh.
The Lisa Page puppet exists because sometimes Lisa Page had things to say and wasn't allowed to appear on In Lieu of Fun because of her contract with MSNBC, and so she would text us things, and the Lisa Page puppet would say them.
Yeah, like this.
Got it.
It was so off the rails is like an excellent word for it. So I think that we have to address the elephant in the room, which is that Tammy, you were part of the original conversation, I believe, at the like a year ago when Ben was first thinking about doing this show as like an idea, and you and Jonathan Rausch, and Jonathan has been on all the time. I love Jonathan, and I think you were there too. And wait, Ben, did Tammy vote for or against?
Everybody
Did I
voted.
even vote?
No, there was no vote. It was like
Yeah,
I
I don't
suggested
remember
that we should live stream these sessions,
And everyone was like, wah, wah.
Tammy and Corey Shockey and Jonathan Rausch and everybody else on the call, I forget who else was on it, made fun of me, so I called you. That's how Lieu of Fun happened.
Yeah, well, look, I think it's very different to contemplate live streaming your happy hour with your friends, or creating a new happy hour with a new community, which is what you have done here.
That is true. That is true. This is very
And
different.
it's a beautiful community that you have.
It's really cool. And yeah, it's I still think it's funny though that there's like, I just think that it's like some of the best people though coming on. You're right though. I think that is the key difference. Like the Tammy to you, and then Jonathan, and then Corey Shockey kind of have just been, they have like a really natural, they're all been excellent. You would never have thought, but I think that Tammy, do you agree with Tammy now, Ben?
No. I think that Tammy, Corey, Jonathan Rausch, Ben Wittes show would have been good fun. I'm delighted that it didn't happen because this happened and we've done 318 episodes of this and it's been great. So it's very hard to regret the things that work out in life. But if we had the same argument over again, it wasn't an argument. It wasn't
an argument. It was Ben's proposal, and we all simply
just shot it down with a shocking lack of due process.
Here's the thing, Kate, about Ben that I love.
Yeah.
Is that he
There's just
he
one
is
thing.
he is an no. Here is a thing about Ben that I love, but that relates to this.
There are only two.
He's an entrepreneurial mind, which means that he's coming up with a new idea of some project or something to do about 15 times a day. And you never know which one he's actually serious about pursuing at any given moment. And so you sort of say, okay, sure. And then you see if he actually goes and does it. And I think what's most impressive about In Lieu of Fun is the staying power of this thing, that it has become, it's taken on a life of its own, way beyond what I think either of you ever anticipated.
That's certainly true.
That is that's like hugely true. I think that is such a great way of putting it. That is true. Now that I've and even if I've got everything that Tammy just said is like, now I feel like I have an understanding. Like, it makes total sense. What?
No, I'm just processing.
You're very entrepreneurial. That's a great way
that's
of
true.
doing it.
He's very entrepreneurial.
That is and there's something I hadn't thought about this project is like that. But I think that but I think it totally is, and it makes complete sense now. Like I just was, I don't know. I think that's great.
I mean, honestly, the thing that animated it was we were sitting on the couch in the basement having a drink with Corey and Jonathan, and there were some other people on it, I think. There
were a few other people.
I don't remember who else was there, and it was like, hey, this is fun. We're going to have to do some of this stuff.
Yes.
What if every day we had a show where we had a drink with a cool friend?
Yeah, that was the proposal I remembered. Yeah.
Right. That was sort of like, this is the only socializing we're going to do. We may as well figure out how to create something out of it.
But we still didn't think it was going to be, when we started it, I'm sure when you were sitting there, you didn't think it was going to be for 318 days. And that we're all going to start being social online and that type of having a drink with like a bunch of your friends on the screen was going to become normal. I think I still thought that was just going to be like a couple of weeks.
I think I thought it was like a 3-week thing. And I think we all would have thought much harder about how to do it if we had known we were talking about every day for a year. But that said,
here you are.
No regrets.
Yeah.
And now everybody who's been on that call has also been on In Lieu of Fun. You were the last holdout.
Yes.
So let's take some questions from the audience. Audience or Greek chorus, though you are, please upvote the questions because I haven't really looked at them, and so I'm just going to work from the top.
Hi, David. Let's see. I'm reading through the questions now.
Mr. Botts, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks very much. I've got a really brief 2:30 joke for Kate.
Is it about the time that you're going to the dentist?
I'm being silenced. I'm being
Nice.
silenced
Very nice.
on Fox. No one can see me on Fox. Okay.
Very nice, Mr. Botts.
That is enough of that. All right. Dr. Tamara Cofman Wittes. It's such a delight to have you here.
Thank you.
No, really. I love you on rational security, and it's great. What are your thoughts about President Biden's foreign policy speech last week? And do you have any suggestions for Secretary Blinken with respect to restoration of the State Department?
Great question. Well, so the first thing I'll say is, in addition to the presidential directive that I talked about a few minutes ago that set up the National Security Council process, the interagency policy process, there was another directive that he issued last week alongside the speech about the national security kind of bureaucracy writ large. And it included a lot of ideas that that people have been discussing that are necessary to revitalize the State Department, but not only the State Department. And I think that a lot of those ideas, the Congressional Government Accountability Office did a big study of the State Department that came out a year or two ago. Congressional committees have held hearings and issued reports. The Council on Foreign Relations issued a big report on State Department reform. There's another effort underway now by the Truman Project. So there have been a lot of great deep dives on what to do to fix the State Department and to fix it with respect to problems that long predate the decimation of the institution under the Trump administration. Some of those things have to do with how do you bring into the department skill sets that you need, including, people who can do global economics, people who can do global disease, people who can do Arctic issues, people who can do climate change. A lot of the issues at the forefront of diplomacy right now have two features that the State Department is not well designed to tackle. One is that they're multilateral rather than bilateral, and the other is that they demand technical knowledge and expertise. So how do you bring that into the department in a way that doesn't have a 20-year lead time? And there are some small-scale programs that bring scientists into the department, but they need to be scaled up. So that's one thing. Another thing is, how do you deal with what's happened to the Foreign Service over the last 5 to 10 years, but go back in some ways, which is that because of legislation, senior positions is set by statute. And so basically, if you are at a lower mid-level, you have to the senior service. It's maybe not worth it to stay. If you're in your 30s or early 40s. The promotion record on diversity.
We have lost Tamara for a second. I thought by
Minimizing your thing.
minimizing myself, I would expand the amount of bandwidth available to her, but that does not seem to have worked. So let's give her a moment to reconnect, and I'm going to invite her back in, and let's see if we can fix that.
I was wondering if there's, well, actually, I think this is going to be covered in Chris's question. So, all right. I bet you got taken out by a low-flying helicopter.
Yeah, it's always the low-flying helicopters. The funny thing is that we're on the same Wi-Fi network, because, we are married and living in the same house, and mine seems to be fine. And Tamara is just missing.
Maybe she just wasn't having a good time. Maybe she ghosted us.
Maybe she faked it.
She's ghosting us.
Yeah.
I have a funny. Hold on 1 second. Have you happened to see, by any chance, any of the Super Bowl commercials that aren't airing, or like anything else like that?
Nope.
You really pay no attention to this this corner of culture.
No, I mean, I've paid modest attention because Tamara has informed me that there is a puppy bowl, and I like puppies. So I'm aware that there is a puppy bowl going on, and I approve of that.
Hey.
Oh, there she's back.
Yeah,
welcome back.
Sorry. I don't even know when you lost me, and I was blathering anyway.
I don't really know when we lost you either, because I immediately...
You were crackling up for me for a while. But
yeah, you were kind of breaking up for a little while before you disappeared altogether.
Okay.
Let's go to the next question. From London, Christopher Argyris. The floor is yours.
Good evening, Tammy. So I wanted to ask, it's this week will be the 10th anniversary of the departure of Hosni Mubarak from the presidency of Egypt, which people pointed to at the time as like the great achievement of the Arab Spring. So I want to ask you, 10 years on from the Arab Spring, how do you see the legacy, and how would you what would you advise your successor at the Middle East Partnership Initiative, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Middle East, or for Near East? What would you advise them to do in terms of priorities for MEPI 10 years on from the Arab Spring?
Wow.
Yeah. Tamara, before you address that, Christopher, I'm going to keep you on because I want to go to your George Shultz question as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Before can I just tag on a question too to the Arab Spring question that's separate, but it's related because it's about the Arab Spring. One of the things that has been reported, one of the things about the Arab Spring that that I've always written about is the role of social media in the Arab Spring.
Mm-hmm.
And then in recent years, I think Zainab Tufekci, but it might have been somebody else, like kind of has like debunked that myth that social media was kind of such a huge part of the Arab Spring, right? And like, have you ever? I'm just curious what your impressions are, like your historiography of that event is in that regard. Like, when you hear about it or people talk about it, is there an understanding that social media was vital or not?
Okay, so let me just preface all of this by saying I was in the State Department when this all went down. So as I look back on it, I can't help but think a lot about what was and wasn't the American role. And a lot of what I find frustrating about some of the media narratives and even some scholarly narratives in the wake of the Arab uprisings is a set of assumptions about the American role that I don't think are accurate. But that wasn't your question, and I appreciate that. I think my overall take is that the uprisings started 10 years ago and they aren't over. The uprisings began as a result of a series of trends in the region that built over decades. Some of those trends were demographic, this youth bulge. Some of them related to technology. Kate, I would say that in terms of giving Arabs in one country a sense of how other Arabs in other parts of the region were living and what they were thinking and talking about. But more than that, giving them a chance to compare themselves to the rest of the world, right? So if you were a young Egyptian who grew up in the 1980s, you were taught in school about your country being part of the non-aligned movement with, Indonesia and India. And now you can get online and you can see that the Indians and the Indonesians are doing way better than you are. So I do think technology mattered a lot, but I don't think it was as much around the tactical organizing of the uprisings themselves. I think it was about helping people get beyond the strictures of information control by, government, media, and censorship. So all of those pressures are still there. These governments are still underperforming for their people. They still can't create jobs for young people. Young people are still frustrated in their ability to earn enough to get their own apartment and get married and start their own families. So you still have those frustrations. You still have frustrations over inequality and corruption. You still have frustrations over human rights abuses, which in Egypt are much, much worse today than they were under Mubarak. And so none of this is going away. I think a number of governments have managed to kind of steal the advantage back, mainly through increased repression and increased surveillance, not through increased performance. So and we've seen just in the last year, the protest movement in Algeria. We saw the toppling of a military dictatorship in Sudan. We saw protests in Lebanon and in Iraq that brought down governments in those two countries. This isn't over. It's ongoing. And it'll take a while to see how it plays out. So my recommendations for American policy are understand that those pressures are still there and governments have not yet demonstrated an ability to survive, to get away from dealing with those pressures. They still need to face them head on. And number two, continue to invest in civil society, because if governments had the answers to these problems, they would have fixed them already. And the answers are not going to come from government. They're going to come from society, from NGOs, from voluntary collective action.
All right, I'm going to keep myself invisible to preserve video bandwidth for Tamara. This is one of the sacrifices we make in marriages.
What a guy.
We're also all very grateful. This is like a relief for us and our audience.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I understand. Christopher, you have a question, and Kevin Donahue, whom I'm unable to bring on screen, has a closely related question. So why don't you go ahead, and then I will add Kevin's to yours.
Okay, and I do need to preface this by, in full disclosure, that my father is George Shultz's family lawyer, but I'm not asking this question in any terms to try to steer this positively.
Got it.
I just wanted to be open about that. But so what do you see as the Shultz legacy?
And Kevin's amendment to this question, or addition to this question, is who do you think of as the greatest living Secretary of State? I suppose George Shultz no longer longer qualifies for the competition.
Wow. Okay. So what's the Shultz legacy? The Shultz legacy, I think, is one of decency and an old-fashioned approach to public service that had its downsides as well as its upsides, right? Because it was a very pale, male, and Yale, as we might say, vision of public service. That's the State Department.
I haven't
pale,
heard that in
male,
a
and
while,
Yale.
but I've heard that in that they use that at like, I remember, I think the first place I heard that was like Goldman
Yale.
Sachs. No,
Yeah.
Goldman Sachs.
Right. Very similar.
Speechwriter at Merrill Lynch, but like, yeah, it's like a very similar type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, on the one hand, on the other hand, like, he was a decent man who conducted himself in a decent manner. More than that, he was a real, intellect with his own expertise as an economist that he put in service of government in a variety of roles. And I think that he understood his role as serving his president and speaking on behalf of his president. I think that the years that he was in office were an interesting period of transition. The beginning of the end of the Cold War. And so the Reagan administration was still doing some things that we think of now as really the downside or the underside of the Cold War, engaging in proxy wars and things like that. But it was also wrapping up some long-standing conflicts and beginning to engage in a new way with Gorbachev's Soviet Union. And Shultz was key to all of that. So, I do think it's a tremendous legacy. And I think even more than that, his legacy in leaving office, remaining such a big part of Hoover making his papers available through Hoover and making himself available to scholars. So for my colleagues who do kind of the history of U.S. foreign policy or do U.S. grand strategy, those resources, both Shultz himself and the papers, have been invaluable. And not every secretary does that. A lot of people keep their stuff a lot closer. So I give him credit for that as well. Greatest living Secretary of State.
Kissinger. Just kidding. That was a joke.
He was many things. I'm not sure Secretary of State was his most influential incarnation. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I just finished reading the Baker biography by Peter Baker and Susan Glasser, and you really get a handle on what made Jim Baker so effective as a secretary. But he was also a great secretary because he served in incredibly dynamic times and with a president who was incredibly skilled in foreign affairs. And Brent Scowcroft. I mean, the three of them managed to, shepherd the United States through the fall of the Berlin Wall, the reunification of Germany, a Europe whole and free, the Gulf War, and the aftermath, the Madrid Peace Conference. I mean, that was just an extraordinary period. So I think Baker was very skilled, but he was also in the right place at the right time. I work closely with Secretary Madeleine Albright, who is chair of the National Democratic Institute, and I sit on the board. And I think, Secretary Albright's incredible talent, which was evident at the UN and also as Secretary of State, is that she's a coalition builder. She knew Baker was a lawyer. He knew how to kind of find the common win set between opposing parties. Albright's a coalition builder. She's great at seeing the politics and how you can use politics to bring people together and create, the support that you need to get things done. And she did that at the UN. She did it as Secretary of State. At a time when a lot of Americans, in the early 90s were like, hey, the Cold War is over, where's our peace dividend? Secretary Albright went all over the U.S. talking to the American public about why our engagement in the world mattered to them. That, to me, was an incredible and difficult thing to do at that time, and I give her a lot of credit. I had the benefit of working for Secretary Clinton in the Obama administration. She came into office after, the war in Iraq and the abuses at Abu Ghraib and the establishment of Guantanamo. had led large chunks of the world to think that we operated without the principles that we sought to enforce on others. And, she rebuilt America's reputation and role in the world after that. So I think there are a lot of, these are incredible people doing very hard things in very hard circumstances. I just salute them all.
Kate has vanished in a puff of smoke. So while Avi Schwartz is asking his question, I will endeavor to bring her back.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
I have, I guess it's two questions. One is the Israeli left dead? And the other is religious Zionism, political religious Zionism, is it Kahanist, irretrievably so? It's like, can it be brought back? But it's like, has it gone too far at this point?
Yeah,
all right, so wait, before you answer that question, let me translate the second one, because a lot of people won't know what it means. Kahanist is a reference to the far-right assassinated Israeli fascist leader, Meir Kahane, who was killed in New York some years ago. And when Avi says Kahanist, what he's referring to here is the ultra-nationalist desire to seize land and remove people from it if necessary. Is that a fair characterization of your question?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Now you can answer it, Tammy.
Yeah, no, look, I don't know, and I don't know, and I guess my answer to both questions is I hope not. I hope the Israeli left isn't dead, and I hope that religious Zionism is not moving inexorably in a Kahanist direction. I think that actually the way the party leaderships and lists have shaken out for the elections that will be held on March 23rd offer the possibility for a little bit of a resuscitation on the Israeli left. The Labor Party now has a new leader who, full disclosure, is a friend of mine and someone I admire tremendously, Merav Michaeli. But I think that she's really bringing the party back to focus on its electoral base, which, instead of chasing after voters in the center or the center right, and we'll see if that brings voters back home to Labor. And then Meretz is doing something it's never done before, which is really bringing Arab candidates into the party on an equal basis, and I think we'll have to see what impact that has on the right. Look, I think there is a Kahanist party that is running. They ran last time and the time before, and they didn't cross the threshold. And I would like to see them not cross the threshold again this time. But they're just the avowed Kahanist party, right? You have parties on the Israeli right that talk openly about population transfer, or even parties that aren't considered on the right. Avigdor Lieberman talks about population transfer. And then you have parties on the right who talk about unilateral annexation, and even parties in the center who were willing to go in that direction last year. So that stuff worries me, but it is not, it's not, I think what I would like to see is an explicit rejection in the mainstream of the Israeli body politic of the explicit racism in Smotrich and his ilk. And we don't see that yet.
All right, we've got 6 minutes and a couple questions left. Charles, the floor is yours.
Hey guys, sorry the video's not working too well. I'm working with my phone today.
It's okay, we can hear you just fine.
So, all right, my question is, how do you see the Biden administration approaching accountability in Syria? Do you think it will look similar to the Obama-era policy, or is there a realization that a break from prior administrations is necessary? So,
great question.
It is a great question. So if you mean by accountability, Bashar Assad seeing some accountability for the crimes he has carried out against his own population, I think that it is difficult to see a pathway to that kind of accountability without a political settlement to the conflict that makes him vulnerable to proceedings, at a criminal court or something similar, or some domestic process of transitional justice. And frankly, that's hard for me to see right now. The United States is left in Syria with very, very little leverage over a political or diplomatic settlement to the conflict. Assad has managed to regain a lot of territory that he had lost earlier in the war, and he has much stronger support today from Iran and Russia than he did at the end of the Obama administration. And the U.S., meanwhile, which used to have a larger presence in northeast Syria combating ISIS, is now down to a sort of token presence at the base at Atanf on the Syrian-Iraqi border, and that's it. And so how does the United States leverage that very small military presence? How does it leverage its sanctions? How does it leverage other issues that it may have in common with Turkey and Russia and Iran on behalf of a role in the diplomatic settlement of the Syrian conflict? That's a huge policy challenge. I'm not sure I have a good answer to that question. I guess what I will say is, setting aside the U.S. role, what the U.S. can do, this is a dictator who abused and repressed his population for years. When they went into the streets demanding reform and democracy, he shot them and provoked a civil war that has now displaced more than half the population of Syria. It has killed probably 500,000 people, and his prisons are still full of Syrian citizens who have been abused and tortured for nothing more than political dissent. So, the crimes are gross and legion, and the process of accountability may take many, many years. I mean, look at Omar Bashir in Sudan. It might take decades, but I think that one thing the international community has made progress on in the last several decades is creating accountability structures that, even if it takes several decades, can still create accountability when the political architecture allows for it.
All right. We got one more question and one low-flying helicopter story from Mike Godwin.
Awesome.
So, Daniel, you get the last question today, and then Mike Godwin gets the last low-flying helicopter story.
I want to hear this.
Hello.
Go ahead. Hey, Daniel.
So, I have an unserious question, and I'll tack on a serious question. Don't low-flying helicopters carrying President Biden sound a lot better than ones carrying President Trump? The serious question, of the global hotspots today, which ones are you most optimistic about getting some type of acceptable resolution, and which ones worry you the most?
Great question. I will say perhaps I resent the helicopters slightly less when I imagine who they are carrying today, but they still make my windows shake. Global hotspots, I don't know. Let me talk about the hotspots that I tend to focus on a little more. I do worry about things like what will happen in Afghanistan if there is not a credible political negotiating process domestically, and the U.S. and NATO partners leave anyway. I do worry about that. I think that country could slip back into warlordism and or civil war all too easily. And so I do worry about that. But in the Middle East specifically, we've had 3 major civil conflicts over the last decade in Syria, Libya, and Yemen, all of them with horrific human costs. I think I have the greatest hope right now about a solution in Yemen, because I think that just about all of the combatants are ready for one. And we'll see if the Houthis are or can be induced to be ready for one. And Syria, as I suggested in my last answer, I'm still quite pessimistic about. Honestly, I think the bigger global crises that I worry about are the ones that are not just about political conflict or violent conflict. I worry about the impact of climate change on migration, on the global economy, on the stability of fragile countries. And I worry a lot about future pandemics. I think these are things that political structures ought to be able to manage better, but we need to do our homework and be prepared for them.
All right, Mike Godwin, I cannot make you appear on screen. You just appeared on screen. I didn't even have to make you appear on screen.
Hi, Mike Godwin.
You get the last, I guess it's not a question, it's a story.
What? Nope. Hold on really quick. Mike Godwin, when do I owe you an email back on it? Like this week?
Yesterday.
Oh, whoops. Okay.
No, really, I honestly, if you can look at this thing by today or tomorrow, that would be great. But don't.
Okay.
I know you're recovering.
Sorry.
So I totally get that. Don't panic. A couple of things. One, I have friends in Myanmar who are telling me that the coup is shutting down the internet, but they're telling me over the internet, so that's a little bit promising. But the other thing is that I promised my low-flying helicopter story, and so I'll tell you a story of 2011. I lived in Oakland, 2 blocks from Occupy Oakland, during the Occupy Oakland movement. And I felt kind of safe in downtown Oakland during that period, because it used to be downtown Oakland was unsafe to walk around. But when there are a lot of eyes, watching you, you're less likely to be held up at gunpoint. So I felt kind of safe. But I would go home and go to sleep, and then I woke up in the middle of the night during Occupy Oakland. And when you wake up in the middle of the night in California, you think, was it an earthquake? That's the first thing you think. Did I have an earthquake and it just woke me up? And I couldn't figure it out, so I got on Twitter, as one does, to figure out what was happening. And people were saying that there had been a police intervention in Franco Ogawa Square in Occupy Oakland. I said, that happened last night. And then I realized, no, it's happening right now. And it was the low-flying helicopters that had awakened me, because it was like an earthquake. The low-flying helicopters were like an earthquake. It was so fucking loud that I couldn't sleep. And so I just wanted to tell you that I feel your pain, but the good side of this was that once I realized it was happening, I grabbed a notebook and then ran out and reported the fucking story.
I was really hoping you were going to say I grabbed a shotgun and I went to the roof.
I want to be very clear to everyone in the audience. I do not believe in bringing down helicopters.
Yes, I know.
In fact, I want them to be higher altitude than they are.
May they fly free, further away.
Yes, exactly.
All right. We have, Tamara and I have a couple of pizzas to make. And so we are going to wrap up the show. We have no idea who.
5 hours.
We have no idea who the guest is going to be tomorrow, because we haven't planned the show. But several of the people who refused to be my mystery guest today said that they did want to come on this week. So I will try to get those people scheduled. In the meantime, we will be back 22 hours and 56 minutes from now. With some guest, hopefully booked before half an hour before the show. And until then, Kate?
We're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we're finally allowed to have Tamara Cofman Wittes on In Lieu of Fun, and I was like, this was the jam. I'm so glad you came on, Tammy. This was great.
Great to see you.